Cool. So we'll move on to the next question. We know that sexting is a big issue amongst young people, not just here, but worldwide as well. In Queensland, what are the legalities around sexting, and what can happen when it goes wrong?
So there is actually a government website, the Legal Aid Queensland government website, and they will go through all of the legalities involved with sexting and what constitutes as sexting, and the criminal offence side of things for people who send or possess images or videos and things like that who are under the age of 18. And there can be some serious consequences for that happening as a minor, and things that people may not actually be aware of or know about. I know there's, there can be imprisonment as a consequence, and for this kind of a situation, which I think there may not be that much understanding around what that is. I think sometimes there can be the perception that something like that wouldn't happen, or this is okay, but I think there's a lot of risks kind of that can be involved, and I think that's probably why the consequences and the penalties around this kind of sexting, going wrong, or things being kind of sent or without the consent of somebody. So I think it's quite a complex and really broad issue for minors who might be if you're questioning this kind of thing that's happening for you, then it's definitely just kind of having the knowledge around what that looks like in Queensland, and that might actually also help and support you around your kind of boundaries and understanding and knowledge when it comes to sexting as well, and what that really means. So also I think there is legalities even around sexting or sharing photos online, and how that is considered as cyberbullying, from my understanding, and that is a criminal offence in itself as well. So I think it's really important to check out the legalities in your state and where you live, because that might vary from state to state too. So I think there's no harm in people kind of just having the knowledge around that, and so you can kind of be more confident in if you're finding there's any situation that is making you feel unsafe, or that you have questions about for yourself or someone and just know, even from my perspective, even just reporting to police, talking to someone that you trust as well. If you're not sure, if you need help, and I know on social media platforms there's the ability to report content as well. So making use of those as needed, or if there is something that you see online that is not okay, or something that it even doesn't, feel right, or that you think would warrant, being investigated.
Yeah. So we discussed in an earlier episode the concept and prevalence of victim blaming. How do you think this plays into sexting and consent online?
Okay, before I start talking about the answer, I'd like to briefly recap what is victim blaming about. So my understanding of victim blaming is it's actually a natural psychology response. It's sort of like a coping strategy for, I guess, lots of bystanders in the context of young people. So there's young people's parents whose children are not actually victims, that they tend to adopt to this psychological reaction. The reason, one of the important underlying reason could be they need to think this way because we're good people, hence the bad things shouldn't happen to us, and there must be something wrong with this victim or her or his parents, and because we believe in the world is just, is fair, and hence, but in the meantime, they tend to forget sometimes a seemingly normal person can do harmful things, and sometimes the bad things do happen to the good people. So this phenomenon is actually cultivating a culture so when we talk about sexting, when the victims actually being held accountable, sexting is not just a simple action. It includes different group of people. Could be multiple, could be single victims, could be multiple or single perpetrators, and multiple bystanders. And you and me could be one of the bystanders. So if everybody adopt to this social norm, or almost normalize the social culture of blaming the victim and just assuming that something happened, something wrong they did, where are the perpetrators? Where can we make them visible? So why are we making them invisible? These are questions. And so when we talk about sexting laws, I understand it's black and white, but in the ethical world, there is a gray area, especially between for people between 16 to 18. So my knowledge is for in most of states of Australia, people above 16, they are actually allowed to have intercourse with their boyfriend or girlfriend, whereas sexting is very straightforward thing not to do. And on one hand, some schools, I'm not too sure if it's happening in most schools, but I've noticed some schools have adopted sex education, which promotes to educate kids and even young adults about what sexting is and what victim blaming is and what consent is. And they using kind of a field model to talk about how to identify the person who is actually not ready to move into this area when they're above 18, and how to encourage the person to clarify themselves if they are genuinely consent to do the sexting. So most victims of sexting, they are either pressured to start sending pictures or videos because they actually wanted to believe their trust in this couple relationship, even though they are in the young age. And they're in young age, they might choose the wrong person to be the one deserve this trust, which is normal because they are still exploring that kind of relationship, right? And in the meantime, most importantly, they are exploring their sexual identity. So one of the Australian famous survey happened in 2013. Actually, I can't remember how many people are involved in that survey, but it's quite large of a range from age, I think it's from 16 to young adult age, including some people who are married. So I can't remember things very clearly, so I'm just going to read them out. Some of the data of the survey mentioned they interviewed those boys and girls what their initial purpose of sending the sexting message. So two top ones are to feel sexy, to give the sexy surprise to their boyfriend or girlfriend, and to be fun and flirty. You know, it's like can't be more normal about doing that at that age. And importantly, 13% of female teens and 4% of male teens, they felt pressured by their boyfriend or girlfriend. And hence, their sexting was not consensual at all. So if you hear that non-consensual sexting is definitely part of a violation to the right, and it can be classified as a sexual violence even. So the consequences for the victims, either female or male, their trust system gets disturbed and could be permanently if they don't seek professional treatment or they don't have a supportive network, things like that. And in the meantime, the bystanders like us, if we are holding that view of blaming victims, imagine how detrimental for these kind of victims. And not mentioning like what Chantel mentioned about cyberbullying on the internet, it's just continue adding more stress and vulnerabilities for these people. So, so I'm definitely the one who support more sex education, either in school and even in the organizations or some social areas, even on social media. That talking about this to make it an open conversation between young people, start conversation between adults and young people. So
like, you know, if a young person or a couple or even just friends who are exploring that relationship and someone asks and they don't want to, or the other person doesn't want to, like, you know, the consequences of not doing it is they're going to be shamed for not doing it and called a prude or something that they don't want to be called, and then they could potentially lose that trust or relationship they really care about. But on the other hand, they could either be exposed and taken advantage of and then called slurs for sending something. So it's like a victim blaming on either side, depending if you do it or not. So it's a little bit tricky for young people to navigate on, you know, what do they want to look like, especially in a young school setting. Like, you know, that stuff travels really far.
Absolutely.
And fast.
And I think in that moment, you know, someone is likely not thinking about, oh, what could this mean? You know, what's going to happen to this, and just not fully understanding potentially what, you know, the risks involved, and which is understandable. You know, it's you know, we wouldn't expect some of those things to happen sometimes,
especially if it's someone you trust.
Absolutely. They do happen. So
and on that note, for these victims or even bystanders, they tend to start questioning what's a real healthy relationship for us in future. Am I doing wrong, or I'm actually the perpetrator? So yeah, it can be a snowballing, like you mentioned before. Yeah.
So we discussed in an earlier episode about boundaries and people pleasing. How do they play into sexting? How can boundaries be utilized and respected online?
It's a great question, and boundaries are tools that help us to feel strong, empowered, and allow us to communicate how we want to be treated, or a certain need that we might have, and ultimately they help protect us in a lot of ways, whether that's emotionally, mentally, physically, sexually. So I think with increased time that we that young people that we spend on social media platforms and on our phones, that inevitably is going to come with some risks as well. And so I think people might be more sometimes inclined to kind of test people's boundaries in an online space as well. They might have kind of more confidence behind in using kind of these platforms or an online space to communicate as well. So I think it can also be easier for people to let their guard down, in an online environment. And, in those times, again, the consequences around, what that could mean for that person if they're, if they're sending, videos or pictures that are explicit for that person, or in a sexual way or in a sexual act, then I guess the consideration sometimes of those like that action, it might not be considered around like the risks that might be involved with that. So I mean, some boundaries that you could consider in this space could be around even just practicing saying no thanks, like with no with no explanation. Just saying just saying no, and you don't actually need a reason for that. And that is enough to say no. And it might mean that you then could walk away from your device, or you could block or delete somebody, or if you were being pursued online in a way that didn't feel right for you or didn't feel comfortable. And it can be hard to say no. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable, but just kind of sometimes there's this strategy around kind of just even imagining or thinking about the ways that you would really kind of benefit from putting in a boundary. How would this serve you? How would this help you by putting this in place for yourself? And I think really just remembering to listen to your gut. You don't need that explanation. And if there is something you did want to communicate, you're often your body will kind of give you signs that something doesn't feel okay. You might feel a bit sick, you might feel a little bit tense, just see how you can actually take time to pause and to just reflect on that for you. And if you're not sure, maybe you take some time away from the device, or you know, get out your journal, you know, or you start, you know, with a journal and you take some notes, and you know, just about what you might be experiencing, anything that you're thinking, you know, and sometimes that can just allow us to kind of see something on paper, you know, about listening to our own kind of needs, because when we understand our own needs, we can actually, it allows us to be able to set a boundary in place. Yeah, 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 and how you might want to communicate that, you know, if you do want to communicate that. But yeah, and I think even, yeah, that I think that walking away and taking the time to reflect, you know, if somebody is asking something of you, or saying something you're not comfortable with, or interacting with you in a way that you're not comfortable with, you know, just listening to how that makes you feel, and just knowing you don't need to respond to that right now.
Yeah.
I think is so key. You know, no matter who it is or what they're asking from you, that you actually can take that time.
Yeah. No response is a response.
No response is a response. Absolutely. If you just need to shut away from it and to not actually engage anymore with that conversation or with that person, you know, that's actually okay. So yeah, I think they're the biggest things.
Awesome. So thanks again for coming in to talk to us. Next week we'll be talking about the teenage brain with our friends Georgie and Dylan. So join us next week.